a while to get going. Here we go. All right. Here we go. So let's start that again. Hello again. So, as many of you know, I just spent the better part of 2 weeks in Vietnam. So, obviously, one learns a lot when doing that kind of thing, and I wanted to probably spend the next 2 weeks talking about lessons and talking about my lessons. This week, I'm talking about my experience of Buddhism in Vietnam, and next week, talking about it's a world pilgrimage. So it was a group of people from, it was a very small group, there were 8 of us, people from different faiths. So talk about what that pilgrimage piece is about and what we can take away from that pilgrimage piece. Because I think there are lessons for all of us, there are lessons I have that I think are relevant and useful for folks out of both of us. So first of all, the Buddhism piece this week. To place that in context, a little bit of history of Vietnam. Viet people, as best I can tell, it is a population that a long time ago moved from the eastern end of the Yangtze River, which is the river that runs east-west across the center of China. It's a really huge river, one of the 3 or 4 largest in the world. So that's quite a long migration. But they ended up in northern, what is now Vietnam. And so that's the Viet people, which is the dominant culture and the dominant ethnic group in Vietnam. But there are a variety, there are a very large number of other ethnic groups in Vietnam with very different traditions and cultures. About 100 CE, the Chinese invaded and controlled Vietnam, and they continued to control Vietnam for the better part of 1,000 years. So during the Vietnam at that time is the whole swathe of Vietnam that goes down from Hanoi and that area up in the north, all the way down the coast to Saigon or Ho Chi Minh City in the south. So that was all controlled by China for about 1,000 years. Then the Vietnamese people gained their freedom, which they kept for a couple of 100 years, and then the Chinese came back in again. And then from there on we move forward to the present day. But what that means is, for the entire period of the movement of Buddhism from India across into the rest of Asia, Vietnam was primarily under Chinese influence. So if you look on the western border of Vietnam, in the north it borders Laos, and in the south it borders Cambodia, and to the west of that you have what do you get? You've got Myanmar or Burma, and you've got Thailand, and then Malaysia swinging on down. So those are all countries, Buddhism went east, and you've got what is now Theravadan Buddhism in those countries. Very Indian flavour. Hinayana, if you want to use the pejorative, right? So that's the flavour. But you then there are mountains, and there's the Mekong River, which are natural barriers, and you've got the Chinese influence over here, so it never really made it across. The influence is all coming from the north and from China. So when you talk to Vietnamese about their religion, or the Vietnamese that we talk to, they talk about we're Mahayana. We're Mahayana. Over there, they've got Theravadan stuff. We're Mahayana. So the practices and the manifestation of it, the manifestation of it comes out of that feeling. So now let's look at what it actually looks like. So depending on who you talk to, the population of Vietnam is either 10 or 15% Buddhist, or 85% Buddhist. And the best I can do to reconcile those two numbers is one of our guides said, well, you know, there's a lot of people say they're Buddhist, and so when they need help, when things are going wrong, they go to the temple and they pray. And then when things are right again, or when that issue's over, they just go back to their ordinary lives, and so they're not really Buddhist. Sounds like most people of faith in this country, right? Another way is we were in one of the places we were staying over breakfast. One of the young men who was working in the restaurant area, the restaurant area, he saw my mala beads and he said, "You Buddhist?" I said, "Yes." And so we had a conversation, and he said, "I'm going to be a Buddhist. I am vegan 4 days a month." and in 3 years I'm going to go to the temple and I'm going to become a Buddhist. So this is the trading wars. You do 4 days a month vegan, and then it's 8 days a month, and it's just, so yeah, he doesn't regard himself as Buddhist. So this is the bit, to me he is, right. So to me this is how you reconcile those 15 and 85. The culture is dominantly Buddhist in feel, and but it's Buddhist in a very interesting way. I went to China many years ago now, and a lot of this was there in China, but China religion is just not so present for obvious reasons. And the Buddhist feeling is there's a much more concrete Tibetan feel and a much more concrete Taoist feel with what I experienced in Chinese Buddhism. In Vietnam, the standard message is, well, we have 3 Buddhas. We have the Buddha of the past. Every altar has 3 Buddhas on it. We have 3 Buddhas. We've got the Buddha of the past, the present, and the future. So is that guy Dipankara and that guy Maitreya? Thank you. Yes, but except sometimes he looks a lot like Po Tai, who's the big fat guy you rub his belly in a Chinese restaurant. And he's the happy guy, right? And then in front of the altar you have the Pure Land Buddha. And a lot of the time the Pure Land, so you've got the 3 Buddhas on the altar, and you've got another altar in front with the Pure Land Buddha. But that Buddha, a lot of the time, also looks like it is Po Tai. And often on the altar, the Buddhas on the sides in particular, they've got like the Mandarin hats. They're Confucian. And next door, you've got a Confucian temple. And next door to that, you've got a restaurant or something. And on the floor as you go in, on the right-hand side, about 2-3 foot tall, you've got a little shrine set up with an altar at the back of it, and you've got 3 figures. And often the 3 figures on the altar, you've seen these 3 figures before. They are health, wealth, and happiness. And one of them, I think, health, wealth, and long life. Long life has a bald head and a really high forehead. One of them, and I forget which one, has horns sticking out the side. So these are 3 figures, typically standing figures. And you'll see these on the altars. And in the temples, so there's a distinction here which is counterintuitive to me. A temple was described to me on more than one occasion. What's the difference between a temple and a pagoda? Because a pagoda to me is an outgrowth of the stupa where the relics are held, and it becomes this tall artifact with the scalloped roofs. Well, the distinction that's made in Vietnam, again by the people I spoke to, is that pagodas are where monks live and temples are where people go to worship. So, where was I going with that? So the temples you go to worship, in many of them you've got this central piece, and the different Buddhas that show up, it's just totally different wherever you go. It's really, there's no consistency. And it's gorgeous. The other thing, on all of those altars, there are boxes of cookies. On the floor there'll be a big plastic thing with like 257 bottles of water in plastic. There'll be flowers. There'll be those burnable banknotes, the disposable burnable money, offering money. Just cookies and fruits, offerings all over the place. On the altars and on the floor beside the altar and on those little shrines on the way in. So you've got all the altars, all the offerings. And then very often you've got side altars. And a lot of the time one of the side altars is Lady Buddha. That's Lady Buddha right there. And they call her Lady Buddha. Avalokiteshvara Guan Yin. In Vietnam her name is Guan Um. Lady Buddha. In Da Nang, which is a town right in the middle of Vietnam, they had built on the hill overlooking the town a really large temple complex that we visited. And this was built like 15, 20 years ago. And there is a 200-foot tall statue of Guan Um, Lady Buddha. It's called Lady Buddha. And people in large numbers go into these temples. We were there at the tail end of Tet, so it was really intensive at the tail end of Tet for a few days. But it continued after that for the entirety of that stay. people come in with just bundles of incense and make offerings, and they would prostrate and they would clearly pray and recite. So in the temples, in addition to this array in the middle, I mentioned Guanun, there's often an altar on the side to Guanun. There's often an altar on the side, which is a Confucian altar, or it could be an ancestor altar. And often down the sides there are other little shrine or altar areas with what are clearly ancestors. So they talk about ancestor worship, and their pictures, typically you go back, depends on, I think the number of generations is shrinking, that's the sense I get. But they have these going back several generations, 3, 5, 7 generations of ancestors. And it's to keep the memory and the energy of the ancestor and the spirit, I guess, of the ancestor alive. And there are certain times of year when they will particularly invoke them. So people practice this ancestor worship, and it is heavily integrated into Buddhist practice. These are all inseparable, just all inseparable. It's this, because you'll have one of these altars which is the lineage teacher and a whole bunch of other pictures, which are obviously ancestors of that lineage teacher. And I suspect, just a sidebar, I suspect if we were to go back and look at how lineage arose in Zen Buddhism, and it also arose in the Huayan school, it arose in several schools, this idea of lineage. I suspect it arose initially out of this, I'm going to clarify what I mean by ancestor worship in a minute, but it arose initially out of this ancestor worship, but then it became co-opted by the government officials, and it became a way of keeping track of all these tax-free entities, which is basically what monasteries were. But I suspect it came out originally of this ancestor worship. So you've got these two practices that just seem really odd to us as Westerners, which are this idea of ancestor worship and this idea of going and praying to Lady Buddha or all these other Buddhas. There's a third one, which is just the confusion of all these different figures of Buddha, right? But I think these all really do make sense if we shift the way we look at them, because what we're looking at is a translation, and I don't think the translation accurately reflects the cultural behavior or the real heart intent of what's going on here. What we look at and what is translated and described to us as ancestor worship is much more ancestor homage. The word is Namo. So Namo Amida Buddha. I take, there's Namo is all the homages we have here. It's a reverence, it's a respect. It's not worship in the way we understand in the West worship. It doesn't translate that way. It's a way of staying in intimate relationship with and showing enormous gratitude for, respect for, and wanting to stay in touch with these spirits. It's not what we would think of as worship. Similarly, there's a fluidity here where people invoke Avalokiteshvara or other Buddhas, where they pray to them for intercession. There's a fluidity in that these are not gods sitting on mountaintops. We've got all these different faces of Buddha. And although this came out of the Chinese tradition rather than the Indian tradition, there is still, I still get a very strong feeling here. And again, this is culturally so different that, and my language around this, the number of conversations is also very limited, but the feeling I get is very much like in the Sanatana Dharma, in what we call Hinduism, there's this enormous pantheon of gods, but there's really only one God. And in Islam, there's the 99 names or the 99 attributes of Allah. There's only one God, but there are 99 attributes. I get very much the feeling that these are just different ways that Buddha nature or the divine or whatever we want to call it shows up. And there's it's really a surrender into this as much as a prayer for intercession. So I'd tell one other little story, and then I'll draw some broad conclusions here. The one other little story, Susan, who is on Zoom here, was one of the pilgrims, and Thich Nhat Hanh, which is the best I can do to pronounce his name. They don't say Thich Nhat Hanh. It's Thich Nhat Hanh. His temple, which I will also mispronounce, Tu Hieu, was in the center of Vietnam. It's very central. His temple of origin, if you will. We went there, and we didn't spend long there. And one of the reasons we went is because it was really important for Susan, because Thich Nhat Hanh was really important to know Buddhist history. And it was a really amazing experience. And I just thought a lot about Thich Nhat Hanh and what we owe him. I had gone there. He's obviously an amazing human being, and I had always had this little edge where it's just nobody can be that important. Nobody can have that much, right? And so there's always been this little edge where I've stayed away from Thich Nhat Hanh, even though he has really affected me. I've read a lot of his stuff, and clearly his teaching is pervasive. But it really landed on me when we went there, and Susan and I just independently ended up just meditating around there, and we both had just really profound, just deep experiences there that we've talked about. He's a staggering figure. Staggering figure, just an amazing figure. I won't go through all of his history, but a couple of things. The temple, we were just really lucky when we arrived, because we arrived when they were chanting. We walked up the hill to the temple. It's this big open thing with the altar and just an open, walls on the side, but just this open space in front. And they were just up there chanting, so we just went up and sat with that. By the way, female, male, yin yang. On a lot of the altars, there's one on either side. For those on Zoom, that's Mok Tok and Bell. And somehow through that experience, I realized how profoundly influential he has been on Buddhism in the West. Whatever our traditions, whatever Buddhist tradition we think we're in, he has really affected Buddhism in the West in a really important way. And you've heard what I said about the culture and the tradition of Buddhism in Vietnam. But when we look at Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, at the heart of his teaching is this whole principle of interbeing. And I think actually the order he created was the order of interbeing. I think that's what they called it. That comes out of the Yogacara school, which was very early and very intellectual and very influential. But in particular, it comes out of the Avatamsaka, or the whole Hua Yen school, right, which doesn't show up down here at all. And he has also pulled in and does an awful lot with, like the Satipatthana, or the Anapanasati suttas, which are some of the core teachings out of the Pali Canon, out of the Theravadan tradition, which again isn't in Vietnam. He has independently gone off and just synthesized all of this stuff to come up with this really beautiful teaching. And this really beautiful teaching actually brings me back to, so what do I take away from all of this stuff in Vietnam? Nobody knows the names of all these Buddhas sitting on all the altars, but it doesn't matter. Just flat out doesn't matter. I don't think, if you think back to the history of this, of Vietnam, and you think of the West's relationship and this country's relationship with Vietnam in particular, there was just grotesquerie going on into the 60s. And then in the 70s, after there was just total abandonment, there was a horrible civil war. There was the tail end of the horrible civil war, and all the 2 million people or whatever died as the boat people came out. Just awful. And that was, do your math, that's only 50 years ago. We were welcomed with such love, with such open arms. It was astonishing. just astonishing. We were, some of the time, a lot of the time, we were in big cities, enormous amounts of bustle. You know, the motorbikes weaving in and out, cars weaving in and out. How on earth all this works is just, you watch it and you see it's like crowds in a shopping mall weaving in and out. People don't bump into each other when they're walking, it's people. But in vehicles, somehow or other, we find it more difficult. They don't. They navigate with such grace. There's a space that's left. Even when everything's bustle, there's space that's left. There's this open awareness that's there. So even in the bustle, there is a stillness in that culture. And it shows up a lot of the time with people just sitting. You go through these bustling shopping malls, and there's people just sitting at their stores. It's just a stillness there. I don't think I heard a single raised voice in 2 weeks. Not one raised voice. And when they talk about praying, when they visit the Lady Buddha or whoever to pray, it's with this in mind, and it's from this gentle heart of calm and of love and of acceptance. So I find there's an intellectual side of me, which you all know is there, right? So I naturally, when I go look at something like this, I'm really curious about how this shows up and what the history is and how this, what these figures are on the altar. But I came to realize that what really matters is none of that stuff. It's this spirit of there's always a little altar there. There's always offerings. And everybody is always offering things to other people. That offering is a spirit of how to live life. And just the kindness and gentleness and the pace of life. So, my Buddhist practice has been shifting in that direction anyway. I spent a lot of time in my early years of Buddhism with Manjushri, the wisdom side of it, but I've been shifting much more to slowing things down and practicing compassion and love. And it really is just a very clear cultural message that is what Buddhism, that's the Buddhism the Buddha really taught. He taught love, he taught compassion. And that's enough. What am I doing here? So, what does that bring up for people? Thoughts, comments? Marcus?
Yeah, hey, thank you, Gareth. That was wonderful. I almost felt like I was there for a couple of seconds, fascinating. But what you described, with the temples of worship and the main altar and then the side altars, and all of a sudden there's a female element on the side altar. You know what that reminded me of? My Catholic upbringing.
Yeah.
There's this male thing in the middle, Jesus, whatever, and then you go to the side niches, all of a sudden that's where the ladies are praying, that's where you get a complete different feel about this whole deal. I remember in the Cologne Cathedral, right, you have this incredible male-oriented, upright, whatever. You go into one of those little side areas and there's the Virgin Mary, and she is covered with gold and jewels over the centuries. People brought what they had, probably pray for something. You guess what it is. Primarily, I would think children or something like that. But what you described just spoke to me in that regard.
And what that goes to, thank you, Marcus, that brings out, there's a universal element in here which comes out, which is most of our religions have, over the last a couple of thousand years ago and moving forward from there, landed in very patriarchal structures, with this emphasis on sort of a wisdom or a whatever you want to call it. But they have all continued to have these very strong feminine elements. There's a deep part of them. And what I was describing in Vietnam is, yes, it's there on the side, but a lot of the time it is intentionally brought to the fore. If you look up Lady Buddha Da Nang, D-A-N-A-N-G, and look at this statue, it's like Jesus over Rio. It's colossal. It's just kind of amazing. Thank you. Anyone else? Charlie.
Actually, I was in Vietnam probably at least 15 years ago, and I was not, I wasn't practicing with a regularity, and but the people were that kindness. We stopped at a farm out because we saw somebody watering their farm in a way that we never.
Yeah.
And we just stopped, and they were so kind to us. And in Hanoi, the guide that we were with, when we went across the street in this incredible chaos, he said, "Just stay right with me and step off the curb."
Yeah.
And people would just make room for you. And so that's just such a different, and the only horns you heard were like, "I'm there," sort of like, just to let you know that I'm there, none of the honk.
That's right.
So it is a longing sometimes I have for that kind of sensibility.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's beautiful to be there and see that it is possible to live like that in a city of 10, 15 million people. Sure.
What you were saying about the ancestor worship and so forth struck me. I saw that as well in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that when you in another culture contrast and see things that are present in your own culture anyway, but it's in a way for cultures to really defeat death that way, to literally keep your ancestors alive, not just in a picture or a statue, but they actually think they're still alive here with us, not in heaven necessarily, but actually running things, organizing things, in charge of the organization, still making decisions, and they're consulting with them regularly for that. We used to do that in the West, but we kind of put death off to something. When you're dead, you're out of here.
And it's really easy hearing what you're saying for people to say, "Well, yeah, of course we don't do that because that's just totally ridiculous because they're dead." Right. But they do it because it works. They're not making it up. It works. And the other thing that happens when we are in that kind of relationship, one of the core Buddhist teachings is gratitude for your parents. Gratitude for your parents. How many of us have that as an intentional practice? Not many of us, probably. But we do have, regardless of what we think our relationship with our parents is, we wouldn't be here without them. There's just a totally different sense of energy around those family relationships. And of course, yes, there are warts in there too. I'm not trying to make it this perfect thing. But this is part of what you experienced, Charlie, and what Susan and I experienced. It's this, there's a real sense of belonging, a real sense of comfort in that belonging. Anand.
Yeah, echo with everyone. I see as I come from East, so I can clearly see what you're saying. There is ancestral worship. That's why I think in Hinduism there are like 30 million gods out there.
Yeah.
And there is a female worship also at a peak. There. But the point is, I just want to understand is not having that in West, right? Buddhism came to West with Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat or
Mm-hmm.
all these great people, right? Um, what's your reading, or what's your what do you see that is missing in the West? Is it or is it because it's so different, right? The culture is so
Mhm.
different. Is that you see any element of element missing in the practice in the West, or is it maybe more focused, or even like more positive side, like not having all of the, you know, the statues and all these ancestors?
I'll give two answers, and the second one is the more important of the two answers, and both of them are kind of a little bit waffly or loose answers. The first one is in the West. So I'm going to go to the word deen in Arabic, or dharma is another one. We've had some of this conversation in this room before. Deen is translated as religion, which is a belief system. Either you believe or you don't. If you believe, you're saved. If you don't, you're not. Dharma is translated as the law. It's translated in lots of different ways, but they all kind of land on something fairly legalistic. This is how you do it. Within their mother cultures, deen and dharma are both more like a way of life. They're rich and pervasive. So that's one. We've landed on, in technical terms, orthodoxy rather than orthopractice, or orthopraxis, believing the right thing rather than doing the right thing. The second one I've now forgotten. Ask your question again and I'll remember it.
Yeah, what is missing in the practice?
What's missing in the practice?
It's
gone.
Not having the.
It may come back. It's gone. But it was a silly little experience I had that would colour it. But I actually brought most of it in there. Natalie.
We can also think, okay, what's missing in the practice, but then we can also think how the Eastern cultures are so much more attached to ancestors, and in the West that attachment is not there. So instead of missing, what is plugging?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see that.
It's just a way to
There's
think
another
about
side.
it, not necessarily ranking them, but
Yeah, I have a follow-up answer to that one.
I've got the other answer I was going to give you.
Yeah.
And this is, I don't know where I came across this, and it's uncorroborated, but it just feels right. Interviews with people coming off meditation retreats. Somebody coming off a meditation retreat in this country, you ask them, so what happened, what experience? And they'll talk about their inner journey and what they learned about themselves and what they're going to do differently going forward. Somebody coming off a meditation retreat in India or Vietnam, they'll talk about their family or their village and what they learned about their family or their village. It's just a different way of relating to the world. So you had another one, and then Pat.
Yeah, I had something to say
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
that. Two things, actually. One is that I was attending one of the Dalai Lama visits, and Richard Gere was there and speaking also. And one of the things he said was that, so I'm not there yet, basically. I still believe in self-realization, basically. And in the West, we're very, very big on self-realization. So that's one thing. So that's one thing that informs all of our practice, even if we're trying to overcome it, right? And move on from that. But the other thing I have to say is about one of the things Thich Nhat Hanh brought to the West is that he kind of distilled everything down and simplified it in a way that can be understood by a Westerner and practiced by a Westerner without having to go back and when I first started learning about Buddhism, I checked a huge book out of the library on Tibetan Buddhism, and it was so dense, and it was so many things to learn, and all of those things. And that's not really the essence of the practice. It's important to some people, and it's a way of getting to the practice for some people. But for me, all I really wanted to do was practice. So, it's kind of Buddhism has to, and it always has, adapted to the environment it finds itself in.
And most specifically, yes, I agree with everything you just said, Pat. And one of the most particular things about what Thich Nhat Hanh did when he brought it all together and brought it to the West was he brought this focus of love and community. It wasn't a focus on meditation. I mean, meditation, there's practice in there, right? But what he talks about is love. What he talks about is Lady Buddha, not Manjushri. I mean, you had something, I think.
So how I see all of this is that every religion, the core teachings and everything, it mixes with the culture of the land.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
So when we talk about Buddhism in the East, how I see it is that over thousands of years, the Buddha's core teachings mixed with the culture and all of that is there. Even if we try, we cannot bring everything here, right? So everybody who has lived in that culture, when they bring those teachings here, they're like a complex web of teachings and everything. When somebody from the East brings his teaching here, he is just bringing their point of view. We have to, I don't know how to say it, but we have to understand or get what touches our sensibility, right?
Yeah.
We understand Buddhism from that point of view.
Thank you. Zoom has been very quiet. I have been keeping an eye on it. I don't think I've missed hands or whatever, but I may have done. So does anybody on Zoom have anything? Susan?
I would just add that the thing that really speaks to me about Thich Nhat Hanh and the practice that he brought to the West is and what I think really impacted him as a young monk is the need for action and engaging in community instead of sequestering and being a monk separate from everybody else, that it needs to be an active practice that impacts the world in a positive way.
Thank you.
So I just want to close my thoughts there. So the way by the way, Pat, thank you. That was a nice summarization. I also feel that way. So I see there is actually the Buddhism on the West is at more advantageous some reason because it's very the practice here I see is more focused, so it's there are more advantages in this practice than Eastern practice, because Eastern you have a lot of as Amit said, it's all intermingled with cultures. There are so many views, and there is some confusion, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of confusion, and that's why I think, Gareth, when you said like they 85% and 15% thing.
Right.
So the 15% may actually get that right, the focus, right? The 85% they don't. There is some confusion. They may just only if there is a problem they go. So they don't really get it, right? So it is that's and all the I see the teachings, all these teachers who came to the West, they focused on the core teachings, and I would say that is the cream of the teachings that West. I can see that even if I try to read the Eastern books, sometimes it's not that clear. Then Western books, right? So there is some that summary and that the main point in the thing I see in the Western. So that's just my take.
Thank you. So I'm going to say just a couple of quick words to a couple of last closing thoughts, and then we'll move to our saving all beings. So thank you all for your comments. One thing that has landed that I do want to echo back is what we have here is wonderful. It really is, and I wouldn't change what we do here for, as my mother used to say, all the tea in China. It's amazing. I love you all dearly, and this is my home. And the practice opportunity we have here is just magnificent. I think there's a lesson out of this that we can bring into our practice here, which is it's the lesson that Thich Nhat Hanh did such a wonderful job of distilling down and bringing over to this country for us, to the West for us, which is to really keep our energy in our practice, to remember energy in our practice on an open heart, on love, on slowing down and creating space, and just to try and keep on bringing that energy into our practice. So with that, let's save some beings. Is chant card still out there on the Zoom? Inside that cover. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Beings are numberless, I vow to awaken them. Delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to embody it. Bruce.
Okay, announcements coming up in the next month or so. Starting tonight, we have the mindfulness practice in the Plum Village tradition, and that has a new name now.
Peach Blossom.
Peach Blossom. Okay, so if you hear that, you know what we're talking about.
And Carol is waving at us. Wave again, Carol. Carol is the chief mover there.
All right.
Thank you. Everyone's welcome to Peach Blossom. And I'm happy to be here with you this morning.
Lovely to see you. Thank you, Carol.
Tuesday evening, Tai Chi here in person at 7:30. Wednesday reading group on Zoom only at 8 o'clock. And Thursday evening practice with Gareth in person and Zoom beginning at 7:30. And
Hang on a second. Go, Bruce.
that's about it for the next month. The big thing in the coming month is a retreat, a 5-day retreat with Gareth at the YMCA camp at Coe up in eastern Tennessee. It begins on Wednesday, 6 p.m. on the 20th, goes through Sunday morning, and I believe there's still plenty of space, so, but don't wait till the last minute. And let's see, special events. Oh, big special event is the annual members meeting next Sunday, which will be at 11:30 following the service, and we will elect a couple new board members, amongst other things. It's an opportunity for the members to bring up issues, ask questions, make statements, whatever they want to do. But
and you get a free lunch.
And you get a free lunch. Oh,
what's not to like about that?
So please try to attend. That's very important. And then on March the 30th, which I believe is a Saturday.
It's Saturday.
Sally is going to do a yoga session, a line stretch, and let go. That'll be at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday the 30th. And that's about it for the next 30 days.
Thank you. Carol, you were going to add something. I suspect that you're hybrid.
Well, that's one thing, but Clay and I have a brief announcement that tomorrow night on Monday at 7, there'll be a brief meeting on this Zoom meeting on the Red Clay Zoom to talk about community service, Sangha community service. Clay, do you want to add anything?
No, I think you got it pretty well.
Okay, great.
7 o'clock.
7 o'clock. It's going to be brief. Give an update about a few simple projects, and coming up soon, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but also another thing in the middle, and you'll hear more about it, and you'll get some emails about it if you aren't able to attend tomorrow at 7.
Thank you for bringing that up.
Just a reminder, there's a Donna basket out in the hall. And if you don't have cash and you'd like to contribute, there's a QR code. Take a picture of that. Do the same thing. I've never done that, but I guess. And then there's always the donation page on the website.
All right. May you have every good blessing. May all the devas protect you. By the power of all the Buddhas, by the power of all the Dharma, by the power of all the Sangha, may you ever be well. Thank you, folks. Bye-bye, Zoom.